This presentation is the second dot point relating to the physiological factors that influence food selection, and it will be focusing on reactions to food. So in terms of your syllabus links, we have looked at hunger, appetite, and satiety, and we've also looked at nutritional requirements including age, gender, size, and activity level. What we're going to be looking at in this lecture are the reactions to food that relate to our physiology, and these include appearance, odour, taste, and allergy. As mentioned before, you should be able to explain, which means relate cause and effect, and show the relationship between these factors on the left-hand side and the physiological factors, and how it does have an impact upon an individual's food selection habits. So that might be what you are required to do in an assessment. So to get started, individuals select, which means choose, or reject food based on their reaction to the food's physical appearance. And this can include its presentation, smell, and texture. Now, we use our sensory perceptions, and our senses help us to gauge and judge the quality and the appeal of food. Attractive colours and the creative arrangement of food stimulates the appetite and the salivary glands. And we learned that our appetite is controlled and regulated whenever we come into contact with food, whether that's by the smell of food, the way that food looks, talking about food. And this does then stimulate the hypothalamus to trigger the salivary glands to increase the production of saliva as our appetite or our desire for food has been stimulated. Now just have a look at these images, and we can see how appearance and colour and presentation might actually stimulate someone's appetite. So we've got a burger here, and we've got a meal here of Lamono, which is like a Lebanese Middle Eastern themed restaurant, and we can see all the different colours that are used and the different textures that are involved as well. Here we can see a few dessert options. So these are little cakes that were inspired by Nectar and Stone, and we can see that there's a bit of gold leaf, there's chocolate ganache drizzle, buttercream icing, and gold sprinkles. And this is another dessert that is sold at Three Blue Ducks in Rosebery, which is a restaurant, and it's owned by Andy from MasterChef, the judge on MasterChef. And you can see here, I guess, the intricate nature of this dessert, the use of garnishes, the use of colour, the use of matcha powder to create this chocolate log that kind of looks like a forest, and it's quite enchanting. Also through the image you can see the coffee and you can see the latte art, and that does invite the person, or it might stimulate the appetite in seeing, I guess, the beautiful design on top of the coffee. Finally, we have Press Club, which is, it used to be a restaurant in Melbourne operated by George Columbaris, who used to be on MasterChef. But you can see this high-end restaurant quality food and the way the food has been arranged and garnished with different colours and different plates to stimulate the appetite. To begin, when looking at appearance, colour has an impact on whether or not somebody will select a food to consume. So the colour of food indicates the quality of it and its nutritional value. Alterations in colour are one of the first signs of food spoilage. And this is very true when we look at fruits and vegetables, and also when we look at foods that contain mould, I guess like bread and cheese. In addition, you can easily see yeast common on the top of bottled preserved foods like jam and pickles, and these are visible to the human eye, and they are usually a white colour. So that is an indicator of whether or not a food is safe to eat, and that is one of the first ways that a person will determine if they are actually going to select and consume the food. Now, some colours very, very rarely occur naturally in foods, so their use in manufactured foods is limited. Now, the best example of this is blue food colouring. So in nature, blue doesn't exist as a colour, Even if you look at foods like blueberries, they are actually a stain of purple or violet. So the color blue, if it does appear in the food supply, then it does indicate that it is an artificial color. And this also might actually deter the person from consuming the food if they're concerned about whether or not they are allowed to have, or if they want to have natural food products that aren't processed, they would definitely steer away from having anything that is unnaturally blue. Now, you might be thinking, what foods are actually blue? Bubblegum, that kind of flavoring is always blue. The bubblegum color blue is always used. You can also think about lollies and confectionery. You've got like blue Allen snakes. Ice cream can be blue, like rainbow colors, rainbow paddle pop, there's always blue colors there. So there's lots of different ways that this food coloring is used. In addition, you can see that people have this, expectation when it comes to the color that food should be, depending on the flavor and the characteristics of it. And if you're having a tomato sauce, consumers expect that anything that has this tomato flavor is in fact red. So we just, as often we connect colors with flavors. And for us to want to consume a food, then it should actually align with what the flavor is, and the color and the flavor should match up. So here, this was a failed food product. It was introduced by Heinz, and it's a colored ketchup, and we've got purple and green. And one of the main reasons this was an unsuccessful product was because of the color, and consumers were not comfortable with eating tomato sauce that wasn't red. Other examples include how color can affect our appetite. So remember, appetite is that desire for food. Now, color does play a big part when it comes to actually stimulating our appetite, and a lot of restaurants and magazines will use tips and tricks relating to colors to actually encourage people to want to buy these foods or consume or make these foods. On the contrary, if they are not used effectively, they can deter people. So having foods that have the same colors, like white rice with grilled chicken that's also white and a white sauce, is not appetizing because there are too many bland or similar colors. However, if you have a look on the right hand side, it's another chicken and rice dish, but it's a white rice with a marinated roast chicken with garnishes of peanuts and also some green shallots or scallions used to decorate and to add flavor. In addition, there are some fried onions too. So this change in color and the variation in color within the dish, it's the same dish essentially, but different colors are used, and that is a lot more stimulating for the appetite, and your desire for food is stimulated, and you'd be more likely to choose this food. Now, shape also has an impact when it comes to the physical appearance of food. So shape influences the appeal of food, and pictures in recipe books show how important shape is in the presentation of a meal. One of the recent innovations in the shape of a food is the change in portion size of very well-known food products. And a good example here is the Magnum Mini. Okay, so having that mini size ice cream and changing the shape does increase the appeal. And the reason why is that you would have a smaller serving size and a smaller ice cream, and as a result, not as much guilt. However, it's not just manufactured foods that utilize this different shape. You can see here that different shaped plates are often used in restaurants, and also different shapes are used to actually present the food, and you can see that here through the circle that has been created. Turgor and texture also relate to the physical appearance of food. So if we have a look through this slide, these are some terms we've already learnt before when we looked at food quality. So turgor refers to the pressure placed on cell walls or membranes by fluids within a cell. And we can see here that this capsicum has high turgor, whereas this capsicum on the right has low turgor. This means that there's a lot of pressure within each cell, the cytoplasm, or that liquid substance within each cell that makes up the body of the cell is pushing firmly against the cell wall, and as a result, this fruit appears to be plump. Okay, and because it is plump and it has high turgor, it also is an indicator of freshness. Okay, Whereas whenever foods lack this turgor and they are shriveled up and they are wilted, it's because there has been some liquid loss due to the food deterioration. So over time, fruits and vegetables, as they spoil, if they're sitting in the fridge or in a fruit bowl, you'll notice that this will happen to them. And this is because as the fruits age and spoil, water loss is apparent. Okay, so as the water is lost from the fruit and vegetable cells, they are not putting that pressure against the cell wall or the cell membrane because the amount of fluid is reducing, and as a result, it does start to wilt. So turgor is really important because for consumers, we look at fruits and vegetables to determine if they are actually of high quality and if they are fresh. Turgor gives many foods a full, fresh appearance and a firm texture, and it makes sure that they are crisp. So turgor does have an influence on food selection because consumers are looking towards purchasing fruits and vegetables that exhibit these characteristics, and they are looking against fruits and vegetables that are exhibiting that lack of turgor. Texture is also another impact or another, factor when it comes to the physical appearance of food. And textural differences in food create interest in meals, and they stimulate the appetite and that desire for food. For example, here, having the soft, fluffy rice with firm meat and crisp vegetables, those different distinguishing textural properties do create interest within this stir-fry meal. Another example here are these tarts, which have crunchy, flaky short crust pastry with a creamy custard filling and crisp berries on top. We're now going to have a look at flavour. So flavour is one of the senses that we experience whenever we are eating foods. And it's a sensory impression of food that is based on a combination of taste and aroma or smell. So we did watch a documentary in class looking at flavour and the different taste buds that do exist. Now, it's important to note that our body uses taste sensors on the tongue to detect differences in flavour with the help of the sense of smell. So flavour only comes about when we combine taste and aroma or smell. Now the mouth has 9 to 10,000 taste receptors, also known as taste buds. Now they are located all over the tongue, and it's important to note that recent research has indicated that there might not actually be specific regions or zones where these taste buds are, and they are evenly dispersed, or they are located across the tongue. But they are also located at the back of the throat and on the roof of the mouth. Now, when you eat a particular food and the taste bud has been stimulated, the taste bud sends a nerve impulse to the brain, which registers that particular taste sensation. So we have sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. And the last one that has been most recently developed is umami. And that has more of a savory flavor and a meaty flavor, and that was developed or discovered in Japan. Now, aroma is another factor, another physiological factor that influences food selection, because the way that food smells does have an impact upon whether or not we will actually choose to consume the food. So aroma describes how something smells. In our nose, there are odor receptors, and these nerves transmit signals to the hypothalamus, which is that control center of the brain. And the nerve receptors send messages from the back of the nasal cavity to the center of the brain. So as you know, taste and aroma are related, and many foods give off aromas or smells that can be smelled before the food is even eaten, as well as when the food is eaten. Another word to describe the smell of something is odor. Normally, when we describe the food as having an odor, it indicates a lack of freshness. For example, whenever you smell milk and it smells sour, then that would be an indicator that that is unsafe or not fresh. However, people can also decide not to consume foods based on the aroma. For example, if a food has a really strong smell, like Parmesan cheese, I know a lot of people that don't enjoy eating Parmesan cheese because of the smell and the strong, sharp smell that it does have. So it really does depend on the individual and their physical response to food, but aroma and also taste and flavour all hacks. We're now going to be having a look at the very last physical reaction to food, and this one is quite important. Now, we're going to be looking at allergies and intolerances, and you're going to definitely need to make sure this is in your study notes and you've updated this information, because I'm going to add a fair bit to what's on the slides. So when we look at the term allergies and intolerances, these are what we call food sensitivities. Now, food sensitivities can be classified in two ways. We have allergies and we also have intolerances. They are both types of food sensitivities. Now, they are both food sensitivities, but they are different. And I'm going to explain the difference between them very quickly before we go through the slides. So an allergy is an extreme reaction to a food, and it is an immune response. So it does involve our immune systems. And what happens is the body actually mistakes the food as being life-threatening and harmful by mistake. And what happens is the body responds to a protein in a food and it thinks it's harmful, and as a result, it releases antibodies to try and attack and get rid of that protein in the food. Now, in doing so, there are very, very immediate signs and symptoms that develop. However, the issue with these is that they are life-threatening in some instances. And this life-threatening response is known as anaphylaxis. Now, anaphylaxis is where the airways actually start to swell up, and as a result, the person can't breathe. And the individual would need to have an EpiPen with adrenaline administered and then an ambulance called. So allergies are very extreme reactions to food, and they allow the person to have an immune response, releasing those antibodies. And because the immune system is involved, the signs and symptoms occur immediately. Now, for someone that has an allergy, they can't have any portion or even the smallest amount of the food they are allergic to. And just for your information, the component of the food that the person is allergic to is known as an allergen. And there are around 7 common allergens. Examples include egg, soy, tree nuts, and by law in Australia, these common allergens must be labelled on packaged food products. So that's some information about allergies. I'm now going to give you some information about intolerances. Now, intolerances are also classified as food sensitivities. However, they are not as extreme because they don't involve the immune system. They involve the digestive tract or the GI tract. And what happens is when a person who has an intolerance eats a food that contains a chemical that they are intolerant to, their digestive tract will be affected and there will be signs and symptoms that develop. Now, some of these signs and symptoms are constipation, diarrhea, flatulence, vomiting, nausea, or even hives or eczema or swelling and rashes on the skin. But because the digestive system is involved, it can actually take up to 6 hours for those signs and symptoms to develop. And it's important to note that it's not life-threatening. This means that the individual will not die if they are intolerant to a chemical and they still consume it. But they really need to manage their intake of the chemical, because over time, if they keep consuming a chemical that they're intolerant to, they might develop deficiency diseases because the small intestine will be affected. Now, intolerances, the most common intolerance is lactose intolerance. And it's important to note that lactose intolerance is an intolerance where a person cannot actually digest the milk, sugar, lactose in dairy foods because they don't have an enzyme called lactase. Okay, and we know lactase breaks lactose down. All right, so that is a 5-minute overview of food sensitivities and particularly allergies and intolerances. But you need to understand that allergies and intolerances are physiological responses to components of food, whether it be the protein in the food or the chemical in the food. And this has a big impact that affects a person's food that they select. If someone has an allergy, they are not going to be eating any food that contains the allergy. And if someone is intolerant, they're really going to be managing their intake of the chemical that they're intolerant to by choosing different food options. So this next few slides give you some more information about these two conditions. So a food allergy, as mentioned, occurs when your immune system responds to a food that they think that your body mistakes as being harmful. And when the food is eaten, the immune system immediately releases antibodies to try and destroy the food. The reaction between the allergen, which is the protein within the food that your body is allergic to, as well as the antibodies, the reaction between those two components causes the symptoms of the allergy, which are dramatic and life-threatening, and they occur instantly or within a few moments. Even with only very tiny amounts of the allergen present, then these symptoms will develop. As mentioned, these are some of the top 14 food allergens. So we have sesame, milk, fish, nuts, egg, sulfite, soy, peanuts, etc. Now the reactions vary between individuals, but may include abdominal swelling, vomiting, diarrhea, itches and skin rashes, wheezing, headaches, and disturbed sleep. So these are the signs and symptoms if an individual is not having an anaphylactic response and it's more of a non-life-threatening allergy. In terms of food intolerances, as we know, are another type of food sensitivity, but they are different to food allergies. And the reason why is they don't involve the immune system, but they occur when nerve endings in different parts of the body become irritated. Now, typically we see irritation in the gastrointestinal tract, particularly in the small intestine. And this is when the body is trying to break down the different chemicals in food, and the body has a really hard time doing that. For example, if we look at lactose intolerance, as mentioned, the enzyme lactase is needed to break it down. However, if we don't have lactase in the body, then our body finds it really difficult to digest that chemical, and as a result, that's when the nerve endings become irritated. So some of the different physical effects of an intolerance are listed. They range from stomach and bowel troubles to headaches, swelling, or hives. Now, it's really important to note that celiac disease is a gluten intolerance, but it kind of crosses over into an allergy without those life-threatening complications. Because with celiac disease, it involves the immune system not being able to react to gluten properly. And gluten is a protein that is found in wheat, rye, barley, and oats. But it does involve the body not being able to digest it properly, which is why it's an intolerance, and it can cause small bowel damage. So this just is a practice question to see how you might be assessed on this content in an exam, and it came from the 2015 prelim exam. Now this question says to outline, and outline is to sketch generally the differences between allergies and intolerances. And it's asking you to write, 2 marks worth, which is around 4 lines of information. Now there's no need to actually define what an allergy is and what an intolerance is here. Okay, all you need to do is provide the differences. For example, some of the information that you might include with an allergy, it does involve a reaction to a protein in food, whereas an intolerance is a reaction to a chemical or group of chemicals in food. An allergy involves the immune system, whereas an intolerance is more so the nerve endings in our digestive system being affected or irritated. With an allergy, it is life-threatening, or it can be life-threatening, and this is known as anaphylaxis, whereas intolerances are not life-threatening. In terms of allergies, you can't even have the smallest quantity of the food, so it relies upon avoidance of the protein in the food, whereas an intolerance intake can be managed. For example, if someone has lactose intolerance, they can still have lactose, but in small quantities, around 100 mils of milk a day. With an allergy, the symptoms are immediate, whereas with an intolerance, the symptoms can take up to 6 hours or a minimum of 6 hours to actually show. So when you're looking at language of differentiation, you're using words or terms like on the other hand, alternatively, unlike, okay? And this language means that you're addressing that component of the question, which is asking you to talk about the difference between.